What's up? And welcome back to another video. So today I have got the Sony 70 to 300mm f4.5 to 5.6 G lens. And what we're going to do is we're going to be comparing it to, in part, this beast. This is the Sigma 150mm to 600mm lens, and it is an f5 to f6.3. Now you may be thinking that doesn't seem like a fair comparison at all. Well, when it comes down to just focal length, no, it's not really. But these two lenses cost almost the exact same, with the Sony 70-300 costing about $1,200, and the Sigma with the MC11 adapter that you need to get it onto a Sony camera coming in right at $1,100 for both. I do have the lens hood on, but this video isn't really going to be a should you buy this one or this one. It's just going to be kind of a reference point. So let's talk about this lens for a minute. So I ended up renting this lens from lensrentals.com, not sponsored or affiliated in any ways, but I ended up renting this lens as well as the Tamron 17-28 for a trip to Alaska that I just went on. So I got this lens for a very, very specific purpose for that trip, and that was to try and get up close to wildlife. I've always heard that you see all kinds of wildlife in Alaska, and I wanted to be prepared if I were to see any. And I was with this picture and this picture. But that was about all the wildlife we saw. But what surprised me is that I got the wide angle lens for the vast, wide landscapes, and that's what I thought I would be using to take those pictures. But I found myself reaching for this lens for those big, vast mountain pictures like 9 times out of 10. And I mean, I took a lot of mountain pictures with this, like this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. So before we go any further, I want to shout out our sponsors that made that Alaska trip possible. Wow, truly great people. For a 70 to 300mm lens, this lens actually isn't all that big. Is it a big lens? Yes. Is it completely unwieldy? No. It does look awfully large on APS-C bodies, but I never found it to be unwieldy when I was out and about shooting, which is certainly not something that you can say about the Sigma. The main reason that I rented this lens is that the Sigma just isn't practical to travel with. This one here fit into my bag easily and took up barely any more space than any other lens would. The Sigma, on the other hand, would have nearly required its very own carry-on bag, seeing as how with the lens and the adapter comes at well over double the weight of the Sony, and double the size too. The Sony is made entirely out of plastic, with the exception being the mount on the back, as well as this aluminum ring around the front. The Sony is designed for full-frame cameras, but will work just fine on APS-C cameras like the A6500 here. There's no kind of weather sealing of any sort around the mount, which leads me to believe that there isn't any weather sealing anywhere in the lens, which is kind of a bummer because this focal length and aperture is just screaming to be taken into the great outdoors. There are a handful of switches and one single button on the side of this lens. The button can be programmed to be autofocus or white balance or any other things that you can set custom buttons for in the camera menu. The switches on the side is a autofocus manual focus toggle, which is super nice, not having to go through a menu to change that. There's also a focus range switch, which will allow you to use the entire focus range from full macro to infinity. And then there's a 3 meter to infinity, which will keep the lens from focusing on like the bugs on a window between you and your subject or leaves. Your final switch is the optical steady shot. The stabilization in this lens is absolutely phenomenal, especially in video. In photo mode, you're still going to want to respect your shutter speed because at 300mm, you can still get a good bit of motion blur in there, even with steady shot active. You're going to want to turn it off if you're on a tripod or something because it does tend to float around quite a bit, even on a tripod. And finally, it is an f4.5 to f5.6, which isn't the brightest out there, but given that this will be used outdoors most of the time, it is definitely adequate, especially given how compact this lens is. Now for the Sigma. I'm not going to dig too much into the Sigma, but I'm going to hit a couple of high points here. It is a Canon mount with a Sigma adapter to get it to go to Sony. The autofocus is still pretty good. It is 150 to 600mm and it weighs over 4 pounds. This is the contemporary version of the lens, and Sigma does make a sport version of the lens, which will set you back an additional $1,000 over this lens. Now, this one being that much cheaper doesn't mean it's bad. It actually takes very good photos. So let's go and shoot some pictures with both these lenses side by side and see how they stack up.
Sarge, you wanna go outside? You wanna go outside? Come on. Ready? You wanna be a model too?
Is this probably a bad idea? Yes. Will they probably not cooperate? Yes. Let's give this a go. We've got the big, huge Sigma lens here on the big tripod. We've got the 70-300 here on the little tripod, and we don't have any dogs over there. Let's try and get that to happen. Sarge, sit, good boy. Stay, stay, Lola. Don't act up. All right, so these were shot at the maximum and minimum focal lengths for these two lenses, except for the Sigma. I did shoot at 300 millimeters to match the 300 millimeters of the Sony. So here we have Freddy at 150 millimeters on the left and 600 millimeters on the right. It gives you kind of a comparison of the focal lengths and the different amount of zoom you get. If we zoom in here to around 200%, you can see the level of detail in the fur and around his eye that you get with the 600 millimeters. The 150, you're more getting limited by resolution than anything else. You can see the details on his tongue at 600. The Sigma is a very impressive lens. Freddy felt like laying down in the water, and I suppose that's okay. Here he is at 302 millimeters on the Sigma on the left and 300 millimeters with the Sony on the right. Let's go ahead and jump this in. So at this focal length, they actually shoot at the exact same aperture. So you're going to get a very similar background blur between these two lenses at 300 millimeters. Let's zoom in to 200% and see if we can't tell any difference between these two lenses. Out of the gate, I'm going to say the Sigma looks like it's got a little bit more contrast, certainly more color. These are completely unedited RAWs. Sharpness is close between the two of them. Zoom in right on his nose there. We're at about 400% zoom right now. If I had to declare a winner, I think I'm going with the Sigma here, but just barely. The Sony is 95% of whatever the Sigma is. It is a very close call, but we're not going to leave it at just this one picture. We're going to check out some more. So now we have Sarge. He's a little better behaved than Freddy is. And now we have him at 300 millimeters and 600 millimeters to see that focal length difference. You can see there's a significant zoom difference here between these two focal lengths. So let's jump in to see the difference in details that you can expect. I'm going to leave the 600 millimeter here with his face filling the whole frame, and I'm going to unlock this and zoom in on the 300 millimeter to about the same extent. Particularly where I can see a difference here is the hair by his ears here. You see how nice and crisp they are at 600 millimeters. These are both with the Sigma, by the way. Fuzzy, you're being limited by the resolution here at 300 millimeters again. The 600 just allows you to get so much more detail in those pictures. So here we go. Here's the Sony at 300 millimeters and back to the Sigma. Again, you see the fur, the details that you can get at 600 millimeters. So this is purely a focal length advantage. So let's pull in a Sigma at 300 millimeters again to see what kind of differences we're getting here. I think I may have missed the focus on the Sony here. It doesn't look as crispy as I think it should. We'll look at some other photos. So here's the difference between 70 and 300 millimeters. This is the maximum wide angle and the maximum telephoto of the Sony. You can see a massive zoom range here, and you can really get in on all the details. Let's zoom in as far as we can here. And again, you're being limited by your focal length and your resolution at that point. All right, let's take these lenses somewhere else and see if we can't get a little bit more of a consistent subject in order to take a look at these lenses. All right, so once again, after several years at this point, we're back on top of the parking garage with giant telephoto lenses. We've got a remote shutter release today, as well as a nice fluid head tripod, so it shouldn't be as shaky as the last super telephoto lens video I did. All right, check it out. We've got the Sony zoomed all the way out at f4.5 or wide open, and zoomed all the way in at f5.6 or wide open. We also have the same two focal lengths here at f8, so stop down a little bit. So let's take a quick look to see how much f8 improves these two photos compared side by side. Now I've already looked at this before, and we're at 260% right here, and I honestly can't see a difference between them. There may be marginal contrast or sharpness improvements here on the f8, but in general, they're basically identical. And the exact same goes for the 70mm shots. At f8, there may be just slightly marginal improvements. I feel like I could see a few more shingles down here, but in general, they look very similar. So the Sony is doing a pretty impressive job given how sharp it is when it is wide open. So let's see how this 300mm f8 compares to the Sigma at 300mm in f8. Here we go, we've got the Sony on the left, 300mm f8. We've got the Sigma on the right, 293mm. I didn't quite nail that. But let's zoom in and check this out. We're at 300% zoom right here, and they look very similar. I think that the Sigma has got a little bit more contrast, just like we saw with the dog photos. And if you look down here at the shingles, you can see a little bit more detail. The darks look a little darker. It just looks a little crisper in general on here on the shingles. So let's go and check out what the Sigma looks like when we crank it all the way into 600mm. And so of course there's going to be gobs of extra detail in here, given that you can zoom in that far. Let's look at the top of this chimney here, just to give us a reference point. And you can see how much bigger that is. And let's go ahead and zoom in to match the size. And you can just see the clarity that you get with that optical zoom rather than relying on digital zoom. All right, here we go, another one, f8, 300mm. The Sony is on the left, the Sigma is on the right. Let's zoom into the top of this steeple here. Let's take it in 400%. And I think right here, this is pretty much a very definitive comparison. Look at the difference between that fin right there. There's a lot more detail on the Sigma. Maybe it's the extra 2mm. No, I don't think so. But I'm surprised how well the Sigma is doing here, given that it is the exact same price point. There's not much chromatic aberration to speak of. You can see a little bit of blue and red here on the Sony. I don't see any here on the Sigma. And these again are completely untouched raw photos straight out of the camera. Now here's this water tower here. This is at 70mm on the left with the Sony, and this is at 600mm on the right with the Sigma. You can see the water tower there in the middle is tiny. One more here to give the Sony a chance to redeem itself. We've got f8, 300mm on the left, f8, 302mm for the Sigma on the right. Let's jump into this here, and I'm going to say that these look identical. There's just a little bit of red and blue fringing here on each side of this chimney, and there's not any of that on the Sigma, but in general these look nearly identical. I think that you could get rid of chromatic aberrations here in Lightroom and you would have essentially the exact same picture. Here's a little bit more of this chromatic aberration that I was talking about. This time it's a little closer to the left edge of the photo here. Alright, finally, this isn't a comparison image necessarily, but I just thought it was interesting to see the background separation that we're still achieving here with the Sony at full 300mm f5.6. This chimney is over 500 feet away from where I'm shooting, and you can still see that you're getting some nice background blur. I thought that was impressive and at least noteworthy. So they can zoom in a long ways, and we looked at the image quality. Now what about autofocus at these ridiculously long ranges? What should I even point at to try and get it to toggle focus? I don't know, we'll see. That was with the 600mm lens, and I thought it was very fast. A couple times I had trouble grabbing it on that trash can, but I was impressed. with the 70-300, it's almost focused before you even get to what you're pointing at. Ludicrously fast. That's great and all, shooting on a big old tripod, but what about handheld shooting? You're not gonna have that thing with you all the time. I mean, it may be recommended for the big lens, but let's see how it does handheld. Well, we'll have to see what that looks like on a computer, but it felt like the Sony did a little bit better. This one, first of all, you've got double the focal length at 600 millimeters, and it's just a lot of glass to stabilize, so I think this one kind of lagged behind just a little bit, a little shaky. All right, in the last video I did similar to this, you guys wanted to see what they looked like, what the images look like zoomed out. So I'm going to show you right now. We've got the steeple over here, that's one of them. We've got the top of this government-looking building here. That's another one. Way out there are the construction workers. The water towers, all the way out there on the horizon, a long ways away. Here's the road down below. The next one was the street, way out there. Tracking vehicles was coming up this road here. The other vehicles that were being tracked were out here on this road, way out there. This is being shot on a 16 millimeter on an APS-C camera, just for reference. So this is about as zoomed out as you typically get. So how'd it hold up? Well, very good image quality. Not unbelievable image quality, but still very good. The zoom range is plenty for, I'd say, 90% of things. Those last 10% is what they make these kind of lenses for. The Sigma has got unbelievable reach and spectacular image quality at that reach. I can't recommend this lens enough for those ridiculous shots. However, there is a disclaimer. You will not use this lens very often. I rarely ever use it. It's right there in most of my videos because it never moves. I got it for like 500 bucks on Craigslist, so there was no reason to not buy it, but it is a very expensive piece of shelf decor. However, when it comes to portability, the Sony wins. When it comes down to a typical use case focal length, Sony wins. Do you ever need more than 300 millimeters? Most of the time the answer is no. Aperture could be a little brighter, but you're gonna spend a fortune if you get more aperture. More aperture? Can you download aperture? Just like you can download RAM? Anyways, if you want brighter aperture, you're gonna spend a lot of extra money. This lens is a good balance of everything brought into a very, very capable and adequate package. So who's this lens for, really? Well, if you're looking at kind of the 70 to 200 range and you want a little bit more length, this has got you covered. This will also be cheaper by about $200 or $300 compared to the f4 70 to 200. This focal range gives you a massive variety. You can use it for landscape photography. You guys have seen lots of examples there. You can use it for portraiture, which I guess technically I did with my dogs. You can use it for sports. You can use it for wildlife. There's just so many different things you can use a focal length like this for. I was surprised that I used this lens as much as I did while I had it. Unfortunately, I've got to get to UPS in like 20 minutes to send it back. If you guys are looking to pick one up, I got links down in the description that help support this channel. If you liked the video, drop a like on it. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next one.